welcome to Unit 2 of the Art Appreciation Masterclass. And in this unit, we are going to talk about discussion strategies, how to talk about a work of art with a group of students. We're going to start with a strategy that is very, very simple, and it is called Visual Thinking Strategies, also called VTS. And this was developed by Abigail Housen and Philip Yenawine of Visual Understanding and Education. And you can go over to vts.org for all sorts of training and documentation on how to do their process. They offer institutes and certifications and stuff like that to really get good at their program. I'm going to put some links in the description to their website as well as to some of the videos that they've produced and that some art museums have produced on this topic to give you some extra information if you'd like as well. So you can find those under this video. But the basic strategy for visual thinking strategies is asking 3 questions and 3 questions only. And those questions are, what's going on here? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can you find? Harvard Project Zero also has a visible thinking strategy where they do those first 2 questions, and then VTS takes it a little bit further with that what more can you find question. And what's so good about these questions is they start with a narrative. And in all the videos and readings I've done from Philip Yenawine, he talks about the importance of narrative with a child, that our brains are sort of naturally wired for narrative. And so that first question really gets right to the heart of the story, and it's an easy question to answer. What's going on here? You can talk about the lines, you can talk about the story, you can talk about the feelings. That question does not guide you in any one sort of way, but it is a good enough question to where you have an answer to it, and those students will always have an answer to that question. That second question, though, is very important. What do you see that makes you say that? And that backs up what they say with visual evidence from the picture. So with these interpretations, there's never a wrong answer. As long as you can back up what you say with what you see, then you're good. And then what more can you find? Just prods them to continue thinking and to continue coming up with ideas. And I've used this strategy time and time again from kindergartners all the way to adults, and it works on everybody. It's so easy and fun to do. And, you don't need a lot of extra information. You, as the teacher, are really just the facilitator of the discussion. So your role in the classroom discussion is to paraphrase, to clarify, to connect what other students are saying. So if Johnny says something that Sue also said, if something similar, you say, oh, you know what? Johnny said this, and that really is similar to what Sue had said. You can say stuff like that. And then the paraphrasing is important because it acknowledges to the student that you've heard them and you've understood them and you've understood their point. You don't have to say it's a good point or a bad point, or you acknowledging what they say to them is validating. And you want to make sure that the rest of the class hears what they said, because often, a student will be kind of soft-spoken, and then you as the teacher can repeat what they say so that everybody could hear it. This way of interpreting art is very non-judgmental. You're not guiding students to any one interpretation. And I always tell my students that their interpretations are just as important and just as valid as my interpretation, just as important and just as valid as the artist's interpretation, or as the art historian's interpretation, or, the museum person's interpretation, that everybody has the same footing when it comes to interpreting a work of art. Because once it leaves the artist's hands, it becomes ours. That painting becomes mine, and I can do with it whatever I want. So it's important to not guide the students into what you want them to get, but to let them find that meaning for themselves. You also have to watch how much information you give to the students and at what point you give it to them. I often will not give the students the title, because the title is going to change their interpretation. They're going to see something in the title that makes them think something differently, and I'm not ready for them to do that yet. I might have them interpret the painting and then show them the title and ask them, well, how are you thinking about it differently now that you've seen the title? What new information does this title give us? Does this title support any of our theories that we've come up with about this work of art? And just use it as more information to interpret and to figure out. And there are a lot of things like the artist's life and historical things that are interesting and that we can bring them in at certain points, but we don't want to give them all the way at the beginning, because we want our students to figure it out for themselves. And often they can figure out a lot of information about the artist or about art history just through looking at it. So if you're at all scared about doing this because you don't know enough about the art or about the art history, then you don't need to worry, because all you need to know is what's going on here, what do you see that makes you say that, and what more can you find? And then you're good. So I've been teaching how to talk about art with kids for a while now, and inevitably someone always says, I'm worried that it'll be crickets, that I'm worried it's going to be like pulling teeth, that the students are not going to have anything to say, and I don't know, and I'm not going to know what to say, and I'm just going to end up talking, and the students aren't going to care. But I have really found that that is not true at all, that students always have something to say. They love doing this. And if you love doing it too, they will love it. So if you do find yourself in a situation where your students are not as responsive as you hoped they would be, I'm going to give you a couple tips and considerations to think about. The first thing I would look at is your artwork selection, and later on in the masterclass, we're going to talk about artwork selection and how to choose a good work of art. Most artworks can be discussed by students very easily. Even the ones we might find to be terribly boring, they still always have something interesting to say. But you want to make sure that you're choosing something that has a lot of different meanings, that there's a lot of things that they can point out and pick out. The next thing I would look at would be your own attitude or enthusiasm towards it. Now, not everyone is going to be an enthusiastic teacher. Not everyone, gets really excited about what they're teaching, and I totally understand that. But I think that if the students see that you find the artwork interesting, that you find what they're saying to be interesting, then they're going to naturally be interested in it. If you're delighted by the things that they say about the artwork, if you're delighted by the artwork itself, then that will rub off on them. So I think, coming with a sense of delight towards what you're doing, that you're doing something fun and interesting, and that is something that they will then find fun and interesting. So it's just something to consider that, I know that when I'm having a bad day, when I'm feeling bad, or I'm tired, or I am not confident in my lesson, or I'm not sure that I chose the right activity, that my energy level is down. And then therefore, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like you're worried it's going to go bad. And so then it does, because you've kind of psyched yourself into that. So I think just really looking at the attitude, and I know you can't keep up that high energy all the time, but for art looking exercises, I find it to be especially beneficial. Another thing is to really focus on making sure that each student feels heard and feels safe in the discussion. So when a student says something and you're not quite sure what they mean, don't just gloss over it. You can repeat back and say, is that what you meant? And they say, no, that's not what I meant. And then you have this back and forth with them to where you make sure that you know what they meant, and that they know that you know what they meant. And so they feel heard. And that's important to them. And even if it's not too terribly insightful of an idea, that the fact that you've repeated it and that you see it too, you see what they mean, that is important to them. And same thing, when I first started teaching, someone told me that I can, when you see a student, you can say, oh, you're wearing a University of Texas shirt. Like, I didn't say I like University of Texas. I didn't say Hook 'em Horns, that's where I went to school. I'm just stating a fact. You are wearing a UT shirt. And they will see that as, yeah, I am wearing a UT shirt. They'll see that as almost like a compliment, even though it wasn't a compliment. It was just you're wearing a UT shirt. They're hearing, I said something important, and she sees that. So I think that's really important that you do that. I mean, you're not going to fawn over all their answers, but you are going to validate that, yes, they see that. But if it is questionable, you're going to ask them, what do you see that makes you say that? You're going to prod them more to make them think more, so that they're more likely to answer in more insightful ways, because you start to train them to back up everything that they say. I also think it's important to move around the room, So if there's a group of students who are not engaged, or one or two students in the back who are just sort of tearing things up or whatever, that you're moving around the classroom. So you're standing at the back of the room, and when someone at the back of the room raises their hand, you go back there and you hear what they have to say. Or I constantly circulate while I'm teaching and leading discussions, because it makes them all aware that you are aware of what they are doing, and I try to make eye contact with as many students as possible through the whole thing. So when I'm making a point about something, I will stare them down and make sure they all know that I see them. So I think that's another important point as you're leading discussions, that if this is a full class thing. I'm not one of those people who force kids to make observations. I know some people do, and I think that if you're in a situation where your kids aren't talking, I think that's a good, pulling a stick out, a popsicle stick with their name on it, and then stuff like that. I don't typically do that because I think, through eye contact and moving around the room and kind of staring the ones down that are not talking and stuff like that, that usually those things can kind of resolve themselves. And then if you find that one student wants to dominate the whole thing, and they're the only ones that keep raising their hand, I just ignore that student for a while. I'll be like, oh, let's hear from someone we haven't heard from yet. If you have 5 people who put their hands up, but those 5 people have already said 3 things each, I will wait until I see another hand raise. And make note of who's talking and who's not. I used to find when I worked in the art museum and I would lead tours that it was the same kids over and over again. And I really had to pay attention to those ones that were not usually raising their hand and make sure that they are part of the discussion too. And some of the shyer students want to say something, but the person next to them is the one that's constantly raising their hand and the teacher doesn't notice. So it's really important that you're really looking at each student to see what they want to say and seeing if they're trying to say something, but they keep getting interrupted or something like that. So really pay attention. You also might find certain classes are just not as good at this, and you can keep track of their discussions. So what I did is I would have a seating chart, and the seating chart would have little boxes under each name, and it would have 10 boxes. And when I was leading a discussion, I would have a clipboard in my hand, and as they would say something, I would put a check. So yes, they're participating, or if I see that they're off task, I would put an X. Or if they're talking when they're not supposed to, stuff like that, I would just kind of mark those things down. And so they see that I'm noticing that. And I don't have to call it out and be like, Johnny, I just marked you as a check for participation. And Sue, I just put an X because you were talking. Like, they see that I'm doing it. And I'll make sure that I'll stare them down to where they're looking at me. And then I so, you can make it to where they notice what you're doing, but you're not having to outright say it. And, if it gets to the point where the class is starting to go off task, I'll be like, look, guys, I'm taking grades here, and a lot of you can't grade on participation like that. But if you can, mark if they're actively participating in the lesson, and that will help the discussion move along, more smoothly if you have a reticence group. Those are my main tips for, leading an active discussion with art. We're going to talk about in other videos more questioning strategy and critical thinking strategies. But I really want you to, if you haven't already, take some time to watch the videos that I've posted below about visual thinking strategies. They've produced some really great material out there that you can, watch a teacher teach in action and see, what it's all about. So check those out, and then come back next week for your video on art criticism. So we're going to talk about the 4 steps of art criticism, how to really slow down and pick apart an artwork separately. So VTS, we're kind of looking at it as a whole, and we're kind of letting the discussion flow from there. Art criticism is kind of a more regimented step-by-step process that works really well for certain types of art. So give VTS a try, and then a thread to the Facebook group will be below this video to continue the discussion about VTS. So you can hop over there to talk with the community about leading art discussions. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.